Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to PTV World. You're watching the debate with Tayyaba Nisar Khan along with our analyst Mr. Farrukh Pitafi along with Mr. Raja Faisal. We're going to talk about a very important interview that just took place right now. The interview that was very groundbreaking and as well as very, very eloquent. This interview I'm talking about is the interview that was just given by the National Security Advisor of Pakistan, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, to the BBC channel, The Hard Talk, a very, very famous show as well, to Stephen Sacker, who talked about many different questions, many different aspects of Pakistani politics, and of course Pakistan's role in regional as well as international politics. He talked about Afghanistan issue, which is the most important issue, and the answers to Moeed Yusuf to these questions were absolutely coherent and very, honestly, it was a proud moment to watch our National Security Advisor presenting Pakistan's view in such an eloquent manner. And of course, then there was a talk about US-Pakistan relations as well as China-Pakistan relations, the shifting geo-economic policy of Pakistan from geopolitics to geoeconomics. And that's what we have been standing for. The shift of geopolitics to geoeconomics was a highlight for me in this entire interview. Let's take a look at this first clip of Dr. Moeed Yusuf, where he's going to talk about, of course, the questions, of course, about Afghanistan firstly, and then let's come back and discuss this.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. As 2021 nears its end, Pakistan's leaders may be reflecting on the wisdom of that old adage about being careful what you wish for. Islamabad has long aided and abetted the Afghan Taliban, and now they are back in power. America's regional power is diminished. China, Pakistan's close ally, is still making massive investments. So does this all add up to good news for Pakistan? Well, not necessarily. My guest is National Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf. Just how secure is Pakistan? It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I think it's fair to say it's been a tumultuous year in your neighborhood, and obviously the big headline is that the Taliban are back in power in Afghanistan. Do you think that has enhanced or diminished Pakistan's security?
Frankly, it depends how responsibly the international community plays the future. We have a situation in Afghanistan. I'm sorry I have to object to your opening. You're presenting this as if Pakistan was behind this and it's Pakistan's doing. We didn't aid and abet anybody. There was a policy employed by the US and others who were in Afghanistan. That was always a failing policy. The only country that kept saying you will not find a military solution to this problem was Pakistan. Our advice was not heeded to. We kept saying negotiate from a position of strength. We weren't listened to. We were blamed. We were scapegoated. And the result is in front of you. So first of all, I want to be clear. The facts should be what they are.
The facts should be what they are in a responsible international community as well. Farrukh, I'm going to go to you first. Of course, the international community has a huge role over here. There's a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan currently. And then we're talking about the role of Pakistan and the Taliban-Pakistan nexus that they're trying to create. So what do you have to say on that?
Right. I think it has been pointed out repeatedly, but it was very apt, reminding everybody that Pakistan has been telling the world that there is no military solution in Afghanistan based on its history and based on what has been happening. And secondly, this is also important to remember, everybody actually tries to blame Pakistan for whatever happens in Afghanistan. When you cannot blame the entire world's army for failing in Afghanistan,
Absolutely.
You cannot actually blame one country. And it was pointed out that it was Pakistan is a country that actually foresaw this, kept on warning you, and also helped you in actually the Doha process.
Absolutely. They helped. Pakistan really helped in the Doha process as well. And of course, we know that Pakistan has been fencing the border as well to ensure that the porous border tries to close down so that the terrorist activities don't come here as well. And then, of course, Farrukh, you talked about how the US, entire nation, is blaming another nation. And then we saw that, Cambodia was blamed in Vietnam. Faisal, I'm going to go towards you. How can US try to blame Pakistan and show its frustration towards Pakistan? Moeed Yusuf has very eloquently also put that.
Well, in simple words, I would say, I think it was just the shifting the blame, scapegoating Pakistan once again.
Absolutely.
They keep on forgetting this, that for 20 years, Pakistan was in active alliance with the Americans, and America should own that. Pakistan has always been standing with them. And they keep on forgetting that Pakistan is the very country that was actually fighting against the terrorism. TTP we were fighting against, and we gave 70,000 lives.
Absolutely.
And more than $220 billion of our economy were lost to this war. The very war they have been talking about, and they have been fighting the same war as well. And now when they are getting out of here, the only scapegoat they find is that Pakistan is behind it.
And that's
This
very
doesn't make
interesting
sense.
and very sad to know that the scapegoat is being Pakistan. They're trying to scapegoat Pakistan because we, as you've mentioned, we've absolutely given about 80,000 civilian lives. And of course, 4 million Afghan refugees are right now currently residing in Pakistan. We're going to facilitate them through all our capacity as well. And of course, as Moeed Yusuf, you will watch in the future clips that we have also helped in the international foreign guests from Afghanistan in going back to their own countries via Pakistan. Let's take a look at this next clip.
Actually, wounded Taliban fighters were treated in medical centres inside Pakistan. So if that doesn't represent long-term assistance, I'm not sure what does.
Stephen, I just hope one day the West introspects, because if the West doesn't, or any country doesn't, we're going to end up in the same cycle again. Pakistan was not the one that brought the war to Afghanistan. Pakistan is the principal victim of this war. We didn't have suicide bombings in our country before 9/11. Since 9/11, over 80,000 casualties of Pakistanis, which the West just likes to wish away. Over $150 billion lost in the economy, 3.5 million internally displaced people, millions of Afghan refugees. You think we are mad that we would be abetting something that is bringing this kind of disaster to my country? So, I think we've got to be real. Yes, these accusations came, and we kept explaining to the world that the reason the Kabul government keeps saying this is that they are corrupt, incompetent, and Western taxpayers' money is being misused. Nobody listened to us. That narrative was brought by the West, and today there is an embarrassment where Western taxpayers are asking their government on where the money went. We had no interest in the way this war went on, the disaster and the casualties that we faced, and the way it ended. We are the country, by the way, we are the country, Stephen, that has been recognized by the US and UK and others for facilitating the Doha peace process, the end point of which should have been a genuinely inclusive government. It was because the Afghan president decided to up and leave his country. It was because the army that was trained never fought, that the end result was what it was. So please stop blaming Pakistan, because I've got to tell you,
Please stop blaming Pakistan. Dr. Moeed Yusuf has rightly put so, because of course from 1995 until 2020 about 500 suicide bombing took place in Pakistan, and Pakistan is the country that took the brunt towards it. I'm going to go towards you, Faisal. As Dr. Moeed Yusuf rightly pointed out, that Pakistan is the one who has taken the brunt and that Pakistan has facilitated in the Doha peace process. So what is the issue right now?
Well, the issue is, I think they wanted to prolong it more and more, but the only solution, as my Prime Minister has been advocating since the day one, the only solution is coming on the table, talking and negotiating peace. And this is what has happened in Doha, and I think this was the end solution. By the way, the thing which was being highlighted, the issue which was being highlighted, that was the wounded Taliban. Very first thing I want to highlight here is that if you take the Taliban and if you take the normal Afghan people, both of them, they wear the same, they wear the beard as well, because that is part of their culture. And if somebody, and turban as well, and if somebody is crossing the border, he's injured in any case, then it is responsibility of any hospital, of any doctor to tend them, to treat them. They can't simply say that you are Taliban and you're not Taliban. By the way, they can never say it, because they are just looking at the human factor. If a human is coming to them for a treatment, they will give it to them. And I think this is, this is very stupid, I must say, of somebody to consider that Pakistan was actually treating Taliban.
Absolutely. This is a very important solution as well, because ICRC and the United Nations have been saying for the past many months that we need to go and help the humans who are existing in Afghanistan, because they're the ones who are taking the brunt of the solution right now. And also Prime Minister Imran Khan, he wrote a very important article as well in September in 2021, just a few months back, and he said that there is no military solution. He reiterated that. Farrukh, I want you to comment on that.
Right. I'm going to come back to the Prime Minister's comment, which was very important. But first of all, let us, create a couple of distinctions. At this moment, it is not the Western governments that are blaming Pakistan. They are not scapegoating Pakistan. They have been acknowledging in public that Pakistan has been full of cooperation.
Absolutely.
Right? It is important to remember, because they are the people in the know. Who has been actually doing it? Civilian media persons like you and I and the pundits. The pundits actually do it for some reason, because they have to prove themselves that they are holier than the Pope, that they are more attuned to the warfare and everything, right? This is an image usually we have seen coming from the media in the past 20 years. So they are blaming. But regarding this question about Taliban being treated, there are two aspects. One aspect is very important, that even in a war, according to Geneva Convention, the hostile combatants are also entitled, who are actually caught, entitled to medical facilities and humanitarian access, right? This is very important to remember. But there is a second thing which is also important, and that is one name, that is Mullah Brother. Remember, it is quite fascinating how whatever went on with him, right? He was first captured by Pakistan. Then it is the US that actually asks us to actually release him, right? Then again, repeatedly catch him, release him. This has been going on. Why? Because the US knew everything. It had 100% visibility, because the state of Pakistan was working with the US and Western partners, and most of these demands actually came from them, right?
Absolutely.
If you understand this bit, you'll understand that the media, Western media, doesn't understand a thing. And the fact is that when it comes to the Western powers, their governments, if they are acknowledging Pakistan's role, in 20 years, Pakistan has been nothing but cooperative. And Pakistan has, as you have pointed out, brought the war to its own turf. We kept on fighting on our own land. Where does it happen?
Absolutely.
It happened here. We lost so much. Whenever we talk about 80,000 people, they are the people who died. They are hundreds of thousands of people who were amputated or who were crippled for life. This country has gone through hell in helping you out. It doesn't behoove you to actually keep on blaming Pakistan.
Absolutely.
Regarding the Prime Minister of Pakistan's comments, Prime Minister of Pakistan has been consistent in 20 years. He has been pointing it out. But the state of Pakistan and the administration in Afghanistan, they have a very interesting aspect that you have to remember. Before Iraq war, everyone thought that Afghan Taliban had been finished. It was when the American administration went out and just invaded a country for nothing, that was the time they lost the war in Afghanistan. And initially it was the war against terrorism. Somehow you made it into a war of nation building. I don't know why that happened.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right when you say that Pakistan is the one that has taken the brunt of all the situation. 3.5 million internally displaced persons as well. And of course, we know that the relationship between US and Pakistan, as reiterated by Dr. Moeed Yusuf, is on the basis of mutual respect. And this mutual respect has to be ensured. And he also said that, the administration is working with Pakistan. The public opinion, as Farrukh, you've rightly said, is definitely having its own opinions, as we can say. Let's take a look at the other clip.
Imran Khan, your Prime Minister, said after the Taliban took over in Kabul, he said, quote, "We must strengthen and stabilize the current government," that is the new Taliban government, "for the sake of the people of Afghanistan." I just wonder if you still feel that same way. Now that you've seen the Taliban in power for 4 or 5 months, does that sentiment still hold good?
Stephen, I have got a 1,600-mile border with Afghanistan. I've got 4 years of experience where 4 million refugees are still in Pakistan after 40 years. Compare this to the European reaction and the British reaction and the American reaction to one refugee that shows up to your shores. I have an experience that tells me that the moment Afghanistan is unstable, my country will be unstable. It's been a porous border for centuries. Refugees flow over, terrorism flows over, drugs flow over. So what the Prime Minister of Pakistan said was, any government, we want Afghanistan to be stable, because if Afghanistan heads towards instability and collapse, Pakistan will be harmed and hurt the very next day. And as Pakistan's National Security Advisor, it is my right to tell the world, as Pakistan's Prime Minister, it's his right to tell the world that the way the international community is approaching Afghanistan, it's headed for a collapse, and if it does, we are going to hurt in Pakistan. So it's my right to explain this.
It is the right to tell the international community that, of course, Pakistan will have the brunt if the situation in Afghanistan keeps on worsening. That's what Dr. Moeed Yusuf has said, and of course, he's rightly pointed out that the refugee, of course, there was a porous border. Now the 90% fencing has been completed, but of course, the 1,600-mile border is a long border, and the porous border allowed all the terrorist activities to seep into Pakistan, and not just that, also the drug trafficking and so many other transnational issues as well. Farrukh, I'm going to go towards you.
Right.
This was something very important, and the way he, tackled Sakner regarding his question, and the way Sakner was trying to put him into a hot seat, but Dr. Moeed Yusuf did not succumb to that.
Right. If you have watched Sakhar's program, I think he is one of few journalists, Western journalists that I respect. It is his job
Exactly.
to grill everybody he brings to his program. So he was trying to do that. But I think that in this round, at least, overall program, it was Moeed Yusuf who actually prevailed and who won this round, right? Regarding Afghanistan and its impact, remember when you were talking about fencing the border, now it is 96-97% fenced, but when did it happen? In the past few years, right? And this war has been going on for 20 years. And remember, even if you fence this border, there are divided families and tribes across the border, and they are so integrated that you had to create this easement right. Right? In that situation, they come over here, we go over there, or our people who are divided tribes, and that is not all. Pakistan has been hosting millions of Afghans as refugees for past 40 years. And Pakistan's economy is not one of the, it is still struggling, and we are trying to recover. In that situation, God forbid, if Afghanistan starts collapsing, it is going to have a dynamo effect through a refugee crisis. Dynamo, yeah. And then also when you talk about, the economic impact, because whenever an economy fails, it creates a kind of black hole that sucks in economic aspects of features from other countries. Dollar, rations, everything. That can create a lot of problem. What is happening in Afghanistan is a humanitarian crisis, and we should be cognizant of that. And I think that Pakistani state is correct in pointing out that a solution is needed immediately.
Absolutely. Firstly, you're absolutely correct that Sakher has been doing a wonderful job in trying to, put Moeed Yusuf on a hot seat, but he was not able to do it, because he also talked about it on his Twitter account. He said that this is a must-watch interview, and that is, a big thing for Dr. Moeed Yusuf, because he did prevail in this interview. Now I'm going to go towards you, Faisal. $150 billion worth of economic loss, $150 billion worth of direct or indirect loss to Pakistanis, not just from those areas who were directly affected by the Afghan Taliban or the TTP, or the ones coming from the porous border, but also within the Pakistani community, not just directly affected by the crimes of suicide bombings, but also other economic issues as well. I want you to comment on that.
Tayyaba, first of all, let me highlight Stephen Sakher's programs. there is another program which everyone must watch. That was his program with Ishaq Dar. When he interviewed Ishaq Dar, that was a must-watch program. I just wanted to highlight that as well. Here, I wanted to talk about the economic loss. You know, when I earlier said that $220 billion, why I said it? To me, I think Pakistan lost even more than that. Why I say this? Because in the war against the terrorism, Pakistan was actively fighting war. Of course, Pakistan's armed forces, they were losing, number one. Number two, we as a country were losing FDIs as well. Foreign direct investment wasn't coming because the security situation of Pakistan was not as such which could be trusted with the investments. That plus there was industries, domestic production of Pakistan, it was halted. Industry actually moved itself from here to elsewhere because they wanted to go somewhere where they could have the ease of business. So we lost so much in that war on terror, and in them 15-16 years Pakistan has lost too many billions of dollars, and we can't even count it. And that's why I said $220 billion. And let me highlight here one question which should have been asked to Stephen Sackur. He should have talked about the Indians' penetration from the western side of the border of Pakistan. Why western side of the border of Pakistan was being used by the Indians to penetrate terrorism in Pakistan. He should be asking these questions from the Americans. He should be asking these questions from the NATO forces. Who allowed them? He should be asking these questions from the CIA. Who allowed them to who allowed Indians to work on Pakistan's western border? Absolutely. Because whatever took place in Pakistan in terms of terrorism, that was being penetrated from western side of Pakistan, from Afghanistan, and who was allowing it? Absolutely. There must be questions raised about
now, 20 years.
Can I come in
sure.
quickly regarding Sackur and what was said earlier? Just to point out, last time when the former Afghan president's national security advisor, that awful man actually had to give interview, they asked Sackur not to take that interview. Somebody else, a woman, was asked to actually take that interview.
If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, and why? Because he asked the hard questions, and I'm sure he must have asked these questions as well. But I just wanted to point out, at this moment there is an image problem with the US and the West as well. The West there are countries that become willing part of your wars, like Pakistan. You end up blaming them for most of what is going on. And there are countries like Turkey, India, who don't.
Absolutely.
And they walk away with all the mileage and support.
And that's very interesting
that is
to
a
note,
big
Farrukh.
problem.
That's a very interesting point to note, because 22 senators, as Sackur has also talked about in this interview, they have talked about how Pakistan should be punished for exporting terrorism, which is very interesting because we can see how strong the lobby of India is within the United States, and they are also paying hefty amount of sums of money to the United States as well in order to lobby against Pakistan. And this has been seen also in the terrorist activities that have been happening. Of course, 20 years of war on terrorism and Pakistan being affected directly by that socio-economic political system, the entire net, the social fabric of Pakistan has been affected. Let's take a look at the other clip of this Dr. Moeed Yusuf report.
But the reality on the ground is this. If I may just quite quickly paint you a picture. We have a country that is slipping very fast into massive humanitarian economic crisis. We have a government which, far from promises to be inclusive, is very much not inclusive. Not in terms of ethnicity, but still less in terms of including any women. We have a government that promised to let girls go to school, but in many parts of Afghanistan, secondary school age girls are not able to get an education. And finally, we have a government which includes within its senior ministries at least one individual who is wanted by the United States as a terrorist. And I'm talking about Mr. Haqqani. So given what we now know about this Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, I come back to the question, does Pakistan still want to support and enhance that government?
If you don't like 30 people, make sure that 30 million die. This is what you're saying. Just understand the connotation of what you're saying. I'm not here to defend the Taliban. The world should go and have a conversation with them. Our message to the Taliban is identical to what the world is saying. More inclusivity, human rights for all, no terrorism from Afghan soil. This is what we want. Why would I want anything else for people of Afghanistan than what I want for my own people in Pakistan? So that's not up for debate. The issue, Stephen, is something different. You talk about facts on the ground. Let me tell you the facts. The UNDP head in Afghanistan says this is the worst economic crisis and humanitarian disaster we have ever witnessed. Quote, end quote. 22.8 million people are facing acute food shortage. 70% are apportioning food. 1 million children are acutely malnourished. That's the reality I have to deal with in Pakistan, because if this goes on any further, I am going to have a serious refugee problem. I am going to have a situation where international terrorist organizations are going to get more space.
The 30 to 40 million Afghan people who are currently residing in Afghanistan have nothing to do with the government's acts and the heinous acts that they've committed and the crimes that they've committed against humanity, because that is a separate issue. The people, the humanitarian crisis continues, and that is what Pakistan talks about, because the people unfortunately are dying. And the statistics provided by Dr. Moeed, Yusuf, of course, I would like to reiterate that 22.8 million people are facing acute food shortage, 70% are portioning food, and 1 million children are acutely malnourished, Faisal. This is a huge humanitarian crisis, and we have to look into and take that into account as well. Why isn't the international community taking that into account? Why are the assets frozen?
Tayyaba, very nicely, our NSA actually diverted Stephen Sacker from the non-issues to the real issues. The issues which are being highlighted by the Western world, by the bigger powers, they are the very issues which are being highlighted by Pakistan.
Absolutely.
Pakistan advocated that we want inclusiveness of the government of Afghanistan. Pakistan highlighted that we want women's rights, human rights, each and everything Pakistan highlighted. But here the real facts are, what kind of humanitarian crisis is just around the corner, nobody is looking at. Nobody is ready to help Afghanistan, today's Afghanistan. Why? There is only one reason. They had a very romantic kind of relationship with the previous regime. The regime I'm talking about, it was the very regime which was actually dropped in Afghanistan in C-130s in Kabul. And that's what they want, because they were their stooges, and this is what they wanted. And they were the very people who were not accepted by the people of Afghanistan.
And they were the very people who ran away as well. Then.
Exactly. And earlier we were talking about that, oh, Pakistan might be behind Taliban. Why don't they say that people of Afghanistan might be behind Taliban? Aren't they the very people who actually welcomed Taliban when they were coming into Kabul? They are the very people who were actually welcoming them. Why? Because time and again they were obviously getting brutalized by the previous regime. They were the very people who were getting brutalized and bombed by all of these NATO forces and Americans. Did we not see that bomb being dropped indiscriminately? We did saw that. That's what they wanted, an end to it. And Taliban, sadly or whatever we say, they were the only people, they were acceptable to people of Afghanistan. We need to accept it.
Absolutely. The previous regime, as Faisal has highlighted, was corrupt, and they were not able to build the capacity that the Afghan people must have had in order to counter the humanitarian crisis that is currently prevailing right now. Farrukh, this has directly impacted Pakistan, as we have been talking about for the past couple of minutes as well. And as a responsible nation, Pakistan is trying to ensure that it brings to light to the international community that right now we need to sit at a table, and the foreign minister's OIC meeting is also coming up. We need to sit at a table and we need to ensure that the humanitarian issue in Afghanistan is finished, because that is not only going to affect and impact the people of Afghanistan, but also going to seep into Pakistan further in the future.
Right. And I totally agree with what Dr. Saab was earlier saying, and your premise as well. I'm a little bit going to disagree with Faisal. That is because it is quite known that I'm no fan of Taliban of any kind. My problem is that that my state has not recognized Afghan Taliban as the legitimate government even
Absolutely.
now. Why is that? They say that the proof of a pudding is in its eating. if you are not eating the pudding, or if you are eating it and it doesn't prove to be a pudding, then it is no more a pudding, right? At this moment, if you have not recognized, that means that Pakistan is closer to, with the, or working with the Committee of Nations, not the Afghan Taliban government, right? We have no love lost. Secondly, regarding the corruption of the previous governments, I think at the start, when it began, there was a valiant effort in Bonn, but in Bonn, because they actually excluded Taliban or their you know, penitent groups, at that time they created a huge problem that most of the Pashtuns were actually left out, and Pashtuns are a big population.
Absolutely.
And this has been a reason, but still Hamid Karzai's government was still functioning, it was better. Then came the election, which had hardly had, remember, Ashraf Ghani became president, we still don't know the first elections results, because Abdullah marched on, threatened to march on Kabul, and at that time John Kerry actually went to Afghanistan, sat them together, and they decided they are not going to disclose that results. If it is the quality of democracy you are talking about, then it is not going to survive.
And also, Farrukh, I'd like to highlight one thing over here. I'm sorry to cut you short.
Very humbly, just one more aspect. And then the next election takes place and there is no turnout.
Absolutely. This is what I was going to highlight.
Yeah. But the second turnout actually proved, and the guy I was talking about, the former NSA, Hamdullah Moeed, that gentleman actually says that if something bad happens, our refugees will take revenge from Pakistan or something like that. That means you are permanently cursing your own refugees when they are going to seek help somewhere. This is a very, very bad kind of situation.
Absolutely. It was not a democratic situation at all, as you've mentioned and highlighted this all. Of course, Pakistan stands with the Committee of Nations, with the international community. We are talking about the three basic points that we need an inclusive government in Afghanistan, and we're still trying to push for an inclusive government. We need human rights for all, and we need no terrorism, you know, being exported from Afghanistan to the other states as well, and rather to combat the IS Khorasan chapter as well, which the Taliban is trying to do, and the international community has to come together with them as well to talk about the ISK, which is a major threat right now. Let's take this other clip of the interview and then come back.
Pakistan is the country that helped more than anybody else. 49,000 people evacuated from Pakistan of 75 countries. We have created a land and air bridge to Afghanistan, asking the world to channel whatever aid they want from us free of cost. But no money can be brought. The UN is crying, the ICRC is complaining. Why are we doing this with the Afghan people?
The United Nations is crying, the ICRC is crying. They want the people to be helped in Afghanistan, but the assets are frozen right now. And of course, there is no money coming into Afghanistan, and there's no help. And Pakistan is trying to channelize and giving them a bridge through air and land. But unfortunately, it's not being the case. Now, Farrukh, I want you to take the lead over here. Pakistan has been trying to help. Of course, 75 countries, nationalities were taken out as well. Pakistan helped in all its way that Pakistan could in taking out the people from Afghanistan situation when it was under a civil war. And right now, we are trying to bring in assets for the humanitarian issue as well. So how do we further help, and how do we ensure that the international community actually recognizes our efforts?
Right. That is very important to remember. Pakistan in this story is the hero, and Pakistan has been helping. Sadly, the story is being written by the villains or people who think that you are the villain, right? So what happens is that you end up being blamed for everything. These days, Americans are worried about QAnon and other conspiracy theories. If the Western media's approach is this, that they just have to blame somebody and get on without actually evidence or based on hearsay, then it will keep on happening. Pakistan played its role during 20 years war. Pakistan played its role while evacuation. Our role was critical. Even Afghan Taliban cooperated at that time. And after that also, Pakistan is the only country that has been raising flag and has been flagging, you know, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
And we are friends of Afghans. We are friends of democracy all over the world. but the world will have to actually stop just talking about things and walk the talk as well when it
Absolutely.
comes to humanitarianism.
Going to you, Faisal, now, of course, Pakistan has been trying to ensure and highlight the fact that the humanitarian crisis has been taking place. And as Farrukh has rightly said, Pakistan is a hero in the situation. Unfortunately, we're not being recognized as heroes. That's a separate story. But then let's talk about the international community. Is it just a talking head? All the heads of state, are they just talking heads and they're talking about, giving humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, but then they're also not doing much towards it?
But Tayyaba, once again, I would use the word romance of the Western world with the previous regime. I don't know why that romance existed in the first place, because they were the very people who were actually, giving them a huge loss in terms of, their corruption. There were ghost schools, there were ghost students, there were ghost teachers, billions of dollars they have been nicking out of the pockets of the Western powers. And Western powers are all okay with it. Here I must say, earlier I highlighted that right now we have very extraordinary situations in Afghanistan, and extraordinary situations require extraordinary measures. Sometimes you have to take the bitter pills to get better. Of course, Taliban could be considered as a bitter pill. That's why I'm saying it. I know my government does not endorse them. I know my government says that inclusive government is the only solution to it, and I endorse it. But at the same time, being a student of politics, I see things a bit differently. Right now, there are extraordinary situations in Afghanistan, and at this time, Taliban, if they are proclaiming that they are different Taliban, today's Taliban are different Taliban, then why not sitting with them, talking to them? They talked with them in Doha, they talked with them in Moscow. Why they can't talk with them in Kabul? Why they can't talk with them in Islamabad? Talk with them, negotiate with them, so that things can be better for the future,
very, very
and
important point.
humanitarian crisis can be countered like that.
A very, very important point by Faisal, that the dialogue should continue, because the dialogue is the reason which will take further the issues that are being highlighted, and then they will be put, into question as well. Of course, the humanitarian issues, the human rights issues as well, of women not being able to go to school in so many areas, of the secondary girls, as Stephen Sackner has also talked about. Now, let's take another look of the clip of the interview and then come back.
First answer is you should recognize the state of democracy in this country, that the judge calls in the prime minister, goes and gets grilled, and now Stephen Sack has the opportunity to ask me. That's the state of democracy. I'm proud of that. Now, first answer is you should recognize the state of democracy in this country, that the judge calls in the prime minister, goes and gets grilled, and now Stephen Sack has the opportunity to ask me. That's the state of democracy. I'm proud of that.
I think that was a brilliant way that Dr. Moeed Yusuf answered this question. He put it back at Sacker, that this is a way, you can see the democracy's level in Pakistan, how it has been improving largely, because, the Prime Minister goes into the courts and then he's questioned very openly in front of everyone in an open hearing as well, where he's questioned about the issue as well. We're talking about the APS attacks and of course the negotiations and the mediation that have been taking place between Pakistan and the TTP as well. Farrukh, I want you to comment on if those negotiations are the right step, number one, as Dr. Moeed Yusuf has been talking about them. And of course, negotiations and dialogue, as he has been highlighting, is the most rational way. Do you think it's the most rational way?
Right. I thought that you are going to ask me about the quality of democracy, and I totally agree with him. But regarding dialogue with terrorists, I don't have all the facts. Remember, most of these details have been coming into the media, and they have been coming from quoted sources. Today he is talking about certain things, but he hasn't given the details. So I would rather not comment on something which is still a developing story.
Okay. Okay, let's go to Faisal and talk about the quality of democracy, as Farrukh wanted to talk about, but let's go to Faisal right now. So the quality of democracy, of course, Pakistan has been increasing in that, and there was, the institutions, they're all powerful now, and they're all able to take a checks and balance system. They're already, able to maintain that. So how would you comment on this?
About the quality of democracy, of course, as Prime Minister has always been saying that it would be a changed Pakistan, Naya Pakistan. Of course, it is a Naya Pakistan. Coming to the other, things about TTP, talking to them, anything related to dialogue. To me, I always say that peace is the only end to every conflict. If we had a conflict, with the people, if TTP, if we had the conflict regarding terrorism, then how can we put an end to it? We can follow the Americans. Of course, what America did and what the Westerners did, they end of the day, they sat with Taliban and talked with them rather than bombing the whole Afghanistan and killed everyone. That's what they did. And I think we have a fair bit of right to do that as well. So if Pakistan wants to talk to somebody about peace, negotiate peace, then shouldn't Pakistan have the right to do it?
Okay, there's a counterpoint to it. I don't want to disagree with the policy, but the comments, this comparison between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Afghanistan was not America's territory. It was not contiguous with Afghanistan. Pakistan is a separate country. We are talking about our own country and people who have been doing stuff in our country, right? So dynamics are different. I think we shouldn't be comparing.
But of course, that's the matter of national security, and it will be further talked about in another show. But let's take a look at another clip from Dr. Moeed Yusuf's brilliant, absolutely brilliant interview, and then come back.
United States very well. You worked there for years in different think tanks. You now, as your job advising Prime Minister Imran Khan, have to consider where Pakistan-US relations are going. I would put it to you that right now they are more damaged than at any time in the last few decades. In fact, am I right in saying that Joe Biden has not yet bothered to make a direct phone call to your boss, Prime Minister Imran Khan? He's been in office for almost a year now.
Yes, that's correct. He hasn't called. If he wants to, we'll consider the call. If he doesn't, it's up to him. That's not a reflection of the entirety of the relationship. Let me explain. US-Pakistan relationship has always had these ups and downs. We come together very closely, we become allies, and then unfortunately, when whatever the US interest was is fulfilled, Pakistan has been basically sidelined and actually in the 90s sanctioned. A mistake that the US acknowledged was a big blunder and should not happen again. At this point, actually, we do have a very good bilateral dialogue, but I think the mistrust over Afghanistan still remains.
Of course, Pakistan is taking the US relationship very seriously, and we respect our relationship with the United States because Pakistan wants to balance its relationship as well. As Saker has talked about Pakistan's growing relations with China, but then again, it's very important to note that the policy of Pakistan has been to balance out the relationship with all the countries, but we have seen the ups and downs in the relationships of Pakistan and the United States. Farrukh, we have seen so many ups and downs. We joined CETO, but then again, with Obama's administration, and then of course the Biden and Trump administration, growing relations with India, the defense deals, the nuclear deals, and creating a strategic imbalance between Pakistan and that.
Right.
Why is India being put into the equation of US and Pakistan relations?
Right. I think that relationship are long-lasting. They have been there for quite some time, but they are a bit iffy also. Repeatedly, the US chose to actually walk out of that relationship. But regarding this phone call, it is really something quite interesting. I don't get what is to be achieved from any phone call. Right?
Exactly.
Two people talk, it is going to be very formal. Hello, hi, this is good, that is bad, and that's all, right? So I don't think that at this moment this Western media's obsession with a telephone call achieves anything. Regarding overall situation, I think that America and Pakistan have done for each other more than any other country has done for each other, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that this relationship will last, but it doesn't have to be subjected to a telephone call.
Absolutely. You've rightly put this, because we have been seeing a lot of speculations on a telephone call between Biden and Imran Khan, which hasn't taken place. But then again, of course, administrative level talks have taken place and so many other issues have been highlighted as well. And that's very important to note. But let's go to Faisal now. Faisal, we've seen Pakistan and US's relationship has been a lot about mistrust lately. How do we deal with this mistrust? How do we overcome this mistrust according to your own analysis?
Tayyaba, first of all, let me hail Stephen Saker that he has actually highlighted my NSA's profile, and of course my NSA hasn't got anything to do with RSS. He hasn't got anything to do with terrorism. He hasn't got anything to do with the thoughts, Hindutva thoughts, as my neighboring India has to do. And I would recommend him that whenever he interviews NSA of India, he must highlight his profile as well. First thing. Secondly, whenever it comes to Pakistan and US relations, since the day one, since 1948, it has always been whatever America wants from Pakistan, and it's a win-win situation for America. America used us again and again, and whenever they did not want us, they simply left us. It is a known fact, and it is on record that Hillary Clinton once said that we left Pakistan and we left ISI with all the stingers and mujahideen, and we asked them, you deal with it. Well, if you leave us after using us, then this is what you would get, and the mistrust would always be there. Why? Because it was initiated by the Americans. American has been, since the U2 incident, they have been using throughout Cold War, they've been using Pakistan. Throughout War on Terror, they've been using Pakistan. And whenever, it is a known fact, whenever their goals are finished in the region, that's it. They just, go away from here, and they don't even ask Pakistan. And this time, of course, they are having a good relation with India. It is my wish that they use India so that everyone knows that how America uses some of their allies and leaves them behind. That's
Absolutely. Very interesting take that you've taken, of course, but I do believe that Pakistan and US have built a very strong relationship, and we can continue to build a very strong relationship because, of course, Dr. Moeed Yusuf in this very interview has also talked about how geoeconomics is so important for Pakistan right now, because that's the pivot point of Pakistan and the anchor through which Pakistan is conducting its foreign policy as well. And that's exactly why we can build more bases of economy in Pakistan for all the countries. Literally, he invited all the countries and very, very pertinently highlighted Pakistan's stance of foreign policy within, of course, the dynamics of security in Afghanistan as well, because of course we know that for Pakistan, human rights, humanitarian issue is of prime importance, and that is what we are talking about. Thank you to Dr. Moeed Yusuf especially for giving this interview and for giving us amazing content to talk about. Thank you to Farrukh and Faisal for joining us as well. Thank you to joining us as well, and take care. We'll see you tomorrow.